Welcome, everyone. Come on in. It's really good to see everyone. It is just a minute before the hour here. It's a minute before 1 in Central Time, so we'll just give folks maybe 60 more seconds to pop in. But while you're here, if you want to just give us a little chat, tell us who you are, where you're coming from. We'd love to be able to connect with you in the chat a little bit. Also, feel free to, of course, use the chat throughout. We have planned our next hour to be conversational in nature by design. So we would like to converse with the group of you. Let me say too that we are recording, so don't say anything crazy. So this is being recorded, and we'll put it on the website afterwards, so we can just share this rich conversation with other people. So we'll just give a few more moments. Hi, Nicole. Hey, Emily. Hey, Judge Nicole. Kim, Lisa, Tamara, so great to see everyone. Oregon, oh, brilliant. Excellent. Cool. Well, I've got one bell in Central Time of right here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So let's kick off. I am Katie Miller. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Leah, and just really pleased to have everyone here today. This is, as you can see on your screen, the 4th of 4 webinars that we have hosted, really to share with you all and be in conversation about some of the things that we learned over the course of a 3-year cohort convening process. And Amelia, I will toss it to you in a moment. She'll tell more about that. But today, we really wanted to make sure to bring this conversation to you all. And that was not only around pushback, because we experienced a lot of that, but really specifically with a lens of race and gender. So I think I will just do a little bit of grounding and then pass it on. So what you see in front of you here is a map of the Twin Cities area that is a pre-colonized version. So we wanted to just take a moment again to ground in space and time, and perhaps you have access to or have some understanding about what was the what your region, your area where you're sitting now, who that was occupied by in centuries and generations ago. And again, we want to just honor how it is that we got here today. So as part of Leah's work in building an anti-racist culture, we want to honor the people whose land Leah specifically inhabits, and you can translate this to your own space. In efforts to build a pathway of truth and reconciliation, we believe it's our responsibility to honor Indigenous people by acknowledging the sacred and unceded land that we inhabit that was stolen from them. And Leah, as I mentioned, is in St. Paul and resides on the land that belongs to the First Peoples of the Dakota. There are 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, and we ask you to join us in our efforts to educate ourselves about the people whose land we reside on and recognize the history that brought us here today. We celebrate their resiliency and respect their sovereignty as they continue to show strength in their ways of living and connection with the land and the water. So may we all together pay respects to elders past and present and emerging. And we, as a follow-up to that, turn our acknowledgement into action and justice and share with you a commitment to continued research and better understanding of the history and the land of which we reside, and really move that into action and justice. There's a few links we'll put in the chat to support that. So thank you so much for joining. We are just absolutely thrilled that you're here. I'm going to have Anna give a little wave. Anna's here with Leah. Anna and I will be tending to the chat to make sure that your thoughts and questions are included in this conversation. And so now I will pass it to Amelia Frank Meyer, who is our CEO here at Leah, who will then introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Katie, and hello, everyone. Just a quick note to the agenda here. I'll just say a bit about who we are, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned in Pushback to Change, and then excited to have a conversation with my colleague Francesca here, who I have known in various capacities over the past few years and admired for a long time, and then we'll just wrap up together. So that's that for today, the plan. So as Katie mentioned, Leah is located in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're a nonprofit, but we work all over the country, really helping change makers and leaders and systems to build new ways of work, focused on keeping families safely together. And we do that through a framework of knowing and doing and being better together. And so really advancing our thinking about how to keep families safely together. In 2017, we hosted a 4-day human-centered design event in Minneapolis, centered around the question of how might we redesign a better child welfare system. We knew we weren't going to figure that out by ourselves, and brought together innovators and change makers from all over the country in different areas. And after 4 days of design hosted by our friends at IDEO, we came up with this answer. This answer was returned to us by the 100 designers. They said, you don't need to redesign the perfect child welfare system, because guess what? It already exists. And it exists in the form of a family. And the right question maybe could have, should have been, when families struggle, as they do, as yours does and mine does, what do we do to help them stay safely together? And so in our evolution of the work, we have begun to try to build that way of work, which we refer to as an unsystem, not the unsystem. It is not a model. It is more of a framework to think about the current system, moving away from blaming, shaming, separating, and punishing families when they struggle, to a new way of work, which manifests itself in various ways and forms in different communities, but that really centers family, that builds on resilience and joy and well-being and health for families, and that has locally delivered resources, natural supports, and that is really family driven. And so this new way of work we have built around trying to create in different environments. And those 100 designers also gifted us something that we refer to as the guiding principles, which are really the hallmarks of an unsystem. They're ways that we know that we are building this new way of work. And those are to really protect relational connections as sacred, to nurture the capacity for joy in families, children, and in the work we do, and to insist on racial equity and radical inclusion, to dare to share power with families and children and with each other, and to commit to intergenerational well-being, and to trust the wisdom of children and families to design their own futures. And then our favorite kind of catch-all at Leah, I think Katie's got her Do What Love Would Do shirt on here, is something we say around here: when you're not sure what to do what you would do for someone you love. And we try to show up with that same level of commitment and urgency and love in the work we do. And so that's where those are. We put together a cohort of jurisdictions who were willing to try to build this on the ground that just ended. Well, I guess it's not just anymore, time flies. Last year around this time, we wrapped it up, but there were 14 counties in 4 states who worked together in their own jurisdictions and then came together collaboratively to build these kinds of principles and practice on the ground. And in that cohort, we had professional guides who were folks who could say, hey, they're doing it like this over here, or we learned this lesson, let's apply it here. And lived experience guides who could say, that may not have worked for me or my family, or this is what we really needed. So those kinds of cultural guides on the journey. And we did come up with some really interesting and amazing lessons and results. Our top 5 lessons were to prepare and take care of yourself and your team, which is essential for the fortitude necessary.
National, like that's what we're saying now. That is always seems
to prepare yourself and your team, to have the fortitude to withstand the change-making process, to really think differently about the work and to make the old way harder and, the underlying that is and the new way easier. To really trust families as the safe bet and suss out the difference between risk and safety, and to begin building on the capacities of families, as well as expanding the group of helpers to do this important work. We invite you to look at the website where we have 3 different case studies on the cohort. The first one really kind of sets the stage for who these folks were and how they came to be a cohort. The second one contains information on pushback to change. We actually pulled that back from publication and wrote an addendum on pushback to change, and had, after a conversation with Heifetz and Linsky of Leadership on the Line, and really learned some important lessons there that we added. That's in that publication. And then our latest one is the summative lessons at the end of the cohort, but all of those are available free for download on the ALEA website at aleainnovations.org. And then lastly, a few key insights around the pushback, and you'll see the advice organized in this way, was really thinking about the adaptive versus the technical challenges. So really learning to have an emergent strategy. There is no, changing the child welfare system for dummies in 3 easy steps. That hasn't been written yet. And so leaning into the unknown and pressing forward anyway. Really seeing change as loss, understanding that when change happens, there are people who have things to gain and things to lose, and where some of that pushback might come from. Really feeling the fear of the unknown and how that can be a freezing response to continuing, but or some of the pushback comes from that. And also, one of the things I'll say we learned is that resistance happens, pushback happens. It varies where it comes from, depending on the system. Sometimes we saw it come from county boards, sometimes from law enforcement, sometimes from foster parents, sometimes from staff, sometimes from unions. It comes from various places, depending on the local culture. But one thing that we are sure of is that it comes. And so preparing yourself for that pushback is a really important part of the work we do in change. Leaning into, instead of your inclination to lean away from difficult relationships. This is life lesson number 5 here that we can all take home. And then again, taking care of yourself and your team around the resistance, and expanding your group of helpers, and making the case for change, which is really around a counter narrative. It's really around helping people understand why the change, what's at stake, what are you going to lose if you don't do it, what do you gain if you do it. And so all of this is in those publications that I just listed, and we encourage you to make your way to our website resources to take a look at those. So on to the best part. Francesca is the best part of our day, and so the rest of it is on the website. You can take a look, but we're so pleased to have with us today, Francesca, and she is going to share with us some of her experience and story. But Francesca is a seasoned child welfare veteran. She has been in this work since 1987. She spent the bulk of her career in LA County, which any one of you who's in child welfare knows is our largest child welfare system, and really is at the epicenter of what we are learning and doing in child welfare in so many ways. In LA from 89 until 2016, she served in a variety of capacities. She was a line worker and also the division chief and everything in between. She worked as the budget officer, the program manager. She worked in quality assurance. For 7 years, she oversaw emergency response, which was prevention and investigations in 12 LA zip codes. From there, she moved on in 2017 to 2020 to be the director of the Department of Family and Children's Services for Santa Clara County, which had over 750 staff, a budget of over 150 million, and over 1,900 children. She is now the Chief Program Officer at the nonprofit organization Koreatown Community Center, Youth and Community Center. And she is a consultant for the University of California, Davis. She's an instructor in the California state system, and she serves as an expert witness and a consultant in a number of other areas. So she is a trailblazer and brings an enormous amount of expertise. And I worked with Francesca for close to 3 years in a relationship where I learned a lot and was able to help, I hope in some small ways, be a supporter to her in some of her change efforts. So we are just really excited to have you with us, Francesca. And one more quick thing before we start here, I think we wanted to kind of center ourselves in a little bit of the research on this. Today we're taking on gender and race as the intersectionality of leaders, and just a teeny bit from the research, which I think you'll see manifested in her story, is that some of the strengths here that we see according to the APA is that ethnic minorities in particular tend to adopt sort of this nurturing and inclusive, dynamic, inspiring, engaging style of leadership that falls under what we call transformational leadership. And this is exactly what we need in our field right now, is this way of thinking and acting, rather than kind of this rigid, bottom line, transactional, historically white male leadership style. And so in an ever-changing world where each one of us wakes up in the morning, looks at our phone, and I don't know about you, but one of my first thoughts is, what now these days, right? Like, what happened overnight? We need folks who are really transformational leaders, who are able to adapt. And so there's such a strength here. And then some of the challenges are, not only the underrepresentation of folks of color, particularly women of color in leadership roles, but in addition, to be less likely to be promoted into leadership roles, more likely to face discrimination, less likely to receive support. And there are very formidable challenges in being a woman of color in a leadership position. And so as we talk about pushback to change, we're really talking about folks who are facing some of the greatest pushback to change in that role of women of color in leadership. So welcome, Francesca. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see more of you and have that conversation here.
So much, appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us. So I'm wondering if you can just start off by starting maybe rooting yourself in some of your life experiences that may have prepared you for being a female leader of color, to think about your experiences and what strengths you draw from your roots, and how you think BIPOC leaders or women of color in particular are prepared for and uniquely experienced and prepared for leadership roles.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a daughter of immigrants. When my parents arrived to North America, they came to this country not knowing anyone, no family, no friends, not speaking the language, having any strong understanding of the culture, but they had dreams of what they could build for their children. So we, as the kids, grew up helping our parents navigate a new world. We would translate for them. We would contextualize the world so that they would understand it. We were in two different worlds, right? So the politics were there early on for us. We were inside our home. We were who we were and where we came from, and we were told the rich stories of how they arrived. And then we were trying to become our own people, American. Like, what does that mean, right? So I think that my parents are BIPOC parents. There's strength, there's beauty, there's resilience in our stories. And without even realizing it, we were seeing leaders. We were seeing leadership. There was rise, there was fall, there was tears, there was joys, but they keep pushing forward. And that's a true leader against all the odds. They continue to push forward and pave the way, for our family. And I think that those experiences aren't necessarily lifted up. They're not voiced, number one. And because of that, they're not necessarily seen as positive, right?
Right. So from early on, really thinking about navigating those barriers and building that resilience and persistence despite the circumstance and navigating more than one world, right? So meeting in there. So I'm wondering if you can just say a word more about, you said they're not always seen as positive, right? Can you just say a word about your experience and how they get viewed in a different light, or what that felt like to feel like you've got these strengths and you're exhibiting strengths, but they're showing up differently through the lens, someone else's lens. Could you just say a word about what is kind of the flip side of that?
So I remember growing up and teacher parent conferences. I was translating for my mother. Even though my father spoke English, he worked 2-3 jobs. My mother was beginning to learn English and speak, but to this day, she's been in this country for like 60 years and she still wants a doctor who speaks Spanish, right? So she absolutely needed someone to help understand the teacher, what the teacher was saying. And so the teacher would say, like, poor you, looked at me as like, poor you that you have to do this for your parents, as if it was a negative. I learned honesty really quickly. I had to be honest, right? I mean, I had to translate what my teachers were saying about me at a very young age. She talks too much. She doesn't sit down in her seat. She asks too many questions, right? And having to deal with that, right? So as you grow up, you learn through society to shed out those things that actually made you who you are. Those innate qualities you were born with, the things that you were taught over the years, you're taught to kind of put those in not even your back pocket so that you can quickly use them. Oh no, you kind of bury that. Because it's not seen as necessarily good. It's a poor you thing.
Yeah, that's so helpful to think about. I just think about how many little girls have on their report cards, talks too much, is bossy, is, all those things that you need later in life, but that we are socialized out of. And so appreciate that story as well. So I'm looking at your bio, and you've really been a leader for a long time in public systems and private systems. And I'm wondering, can you share with us an example or two of a time where being a woman leader of color was an advantage, made it easier for you, made something better or richer, or made it possible for you to connect more deeply, where those strengths really showed up in application?
So I understand that research shows that most leaders of color, especially women, deal with the imposter syndrome. I'm not totally sure to what degree that applies to me. And I've had several instances in which women of different color, BIPOC, different ages, have come up to me and, to use their words, have said, "I look up to you." Have stated to me that they've never seen anyone that looks like them in a role that I was in. So I felt honored. I felt a bit of ache in my heart to hear that. And I even was surprised, thinking to myself, me? Like me? and thinking, I'm you, right? We're no different. You can, in fact, be where I am at. And I vocalize that to them. You know, one day when you take my job, one day when you're in my shoes. And part of that was to be able to inspire hope for them, so that they too can carry on some type of dream and path as to like what that would be like for them. But those feelings for me magnified 10 times over when I've worked in the community. So one of the things that I did both in LA and most definitely when I worked in Northern California is I purposely went out to the community and I had listening sessions. Using data, I actually looked at which zip codes were most affected by child protection services. What doors were we knocking on? And so I had a great team, and they helped me set up listening sessions with various ethnic community groups. And you know, the several times that I went out there, most definitely initially, people were very angry at me and, you know, weren't afraid to show how upset they were. I wouldn't say they literally threw tomatoes at me, but, you know, it certainly felt like ouch, that was a punch. But I stood there and, sometimes I'd respond in Spanish, depending on the community, and sometimes I responded in English. And I always said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how we showed up. I'm sorry for the things that we did wrong, right? And I asked them, you know, help us be better. Partner with us in being better. So they respected that, they appreciated it, right? And then as I would walk out the door, it happened in which they would stop me and say, thank you for being real, right? So, you know, that really swelled my heart, right? I am a reflection of the community that I serve. And so I need to stand besides them, not telling them what to do, but beside the community that I'm there to serve.
Yeah, I think that, you know, what you're describing is that inclusive leadership style, right? That isn't like, we know better from kind of this colonized white supremacist framework of, and we're gonna help you. We're gonna come rescue you, save you, help you. But to literally be on their level, meaning at their doorstep, you know, side by side with a call to partner with us, just a recognition, and that this is not something that a department of children and family services can solve by itself, that it really is something that has to be done in collaboration with community. And so I think that you just kind of illustrated a little bit from the research about how that style is so different, right? And, you know, the other thing I'm wondering about is, you know, there's been a lot, I think a growing amount of talk about the need for truth and reconciliation, the need for truth telling about the disparate outcomes for children and families of color. And I also have heard from a lot of leaders, the worry in saying, I'm sorry, you know, the worry about how that opens you up for risk and liability and an admission that you've done something wrong. And you seem to not have trouble saying that. And I wonder if you could just say a word about the reaction you got. You know, I heard you say families said thank you. What did other people say, or what is the other reaction you got when you admitted fault, or did people perceive you as, you know, did you get anything back around weakness instead of toughness? You know, just, can you talk about that for a little bit?
I think people were mainly shocked and surprised that, number one, as a director, I was actually going out to the community. In fact, I was told, I think this is the first time we've ever seen a director come out to the community, number one. So I don't necessarily think that I was seen as weak. I don't even think that the staff saw me as weak. I think they too were surprised. But saying sorry isn't that I did something wrong, right? It's saying, I'm sorry you were hurt. I could have done things differently, right? It's being human. It's understanding that the things that we intend to do don't always fall correctly in the right way. So I don't see I'm saying sorry is bad. I'm sorry I hurt people, right? That was not my intention. That's what happened. So how can we be better? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you when we partner with folks with lived expertise, one of the most frequently heard things is that nobody ever said sorry. Nobody ever took responsibility. Even if it wasn't you, it was people who look like you or people who you represent or systems you represent, and no one has said sorry. And so I just appreciate you letting me stick with that for a little bit, because I think it's a big thing. I think we're gonna not be able to move forward in change and in transformation until we have a reckoning of our history and the ability to say, you know, harm was done that was not right. And I even have a little bit of a hard time saying unintended, because I'm not always really confident that it was always unintended. I think people did things thinking they were doing the best thing, but kind of knowing some of the impact. So thank you for telling us that story and for saying sorry. Thank you for that. I'm wondering then, just to carry that a little further, you know, if you can talk to us about a time where showing up as a woman of color, as a leader of color, just really made it more difficult, where you felt, I know, right? Okay, we're gonna be here until bedtime.
I do. How much time?
Sorry. I know, but you know, just to illustrate that for people who aren't walking in your shoes, you know, just how does that show up for you? What did that feel like? And I'm sure there were some kind of more common ways where you're like, oh, here we go, right? Like you could almost see it coming after a while, it'd be my guess. And so could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest challenges is dealing with all of the stereotypes associated with being a woman and then a woman of color, right? So you know me, Amelia. I'm not shy. I voice my opinions. I can support it. I love challenges. You know, that's who I am. So my natural character traits that if I were a man would be praised, would be seen as positive, being direct, being clear, being decisive. But being a woman, right? Or being a woman of color, you know how easily it is for people to use a 5-word to describe me? Okay, let's use that to describe me. How does that change our charge? How does that change what we need to do? It doesn't change that. So that was always a big challenge. So, you know, in child welfare, the spotlight is always on you, the media, the politicians. I mean, it doesn't matter. Everyone is looking for that misstep, to make a mistake. Your every single move is highlighted. But then if you're a woman, and if you're a woman of color, well, you're scrutinized even more so because of the stereotypes, right? So I'm too aggressive. I'm not soft enough. Who do I think I am? I'm too decisive. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the things that are characterized as seen as negatives because I'm a woman, not because I wasn't doing a good job, right? So it's like I mentioned, right? For a man, those things would be seen as great. Meeting metrics would be seen as great, right? Standing tall would be seen as great. So yeah, I really do think that the challenge is that gender, ethnicity, race, none of those things should be a part of the equation, but they are.
Yes, they are, just like they often are for the kids and families we serve, right? That parallel process follows along. You know, I was thinking as you were talking to about the double bind sometimes women leaders get put into, which is, you know, if I'm soft, then I'm weak, you know, you're too emotional, you're too compassionate, you can't, you know, do the hard stuff. And if I'm hard, if I'm decisive or clear or assertive, right, then you're the 5-letter word, right? And so how exactly am I supposed to be? Because either step is wrong. And that's what I hear you describing, is that that double bind you get put in. No matter which way you step, you're wrong. Like, how do I do this the right way? How do I behave in a absolutely mediocre way to be a threat to no one, right? Where I just show no emotion, but then if I show no emotion, I'm cold. But if I show some emotion, then I'm weak, right? So so it's just an impossible scenario. It's an incredible walk to do. And it is a double standard. I mean, there just is no other way to say that, because we don't ever talk about male leaders, and even I think white leaders get more of a pass around their personality and the way they show up as more important and over the results, which is what you've illustrated for us. So thank you for that too. I'm thinking about that double standard, and thinking about times where you were judged more harshly or held to a different standard, and that kind of double bind as well. You know, I know we were kind of joking about, you know, having to do all of these things and do them in heels. For those of you who don't know Francesca, she's a very a snazzy dresser. And when I was hanging around her in person prior to COVID and the other changes in the world, she was literally running in heels 14 hours a day in a way that was stunning. And so, you know, you have to do what you have to do, and in heels while running is not really metaphorical for what was expected of you. But I'm wondering, can you just talk to us about a time when you felt kind of harshly judged, or where that double standard showed up for you?
Well, you know, I wore my big gold hoop earrings today because, you know, this is a symbol of who I am, right? So Latina women love big gold hoop earrings. I'm not going to change who I am, right? It's just who I am. It's just what I bring to the table, right? So there's a little bit of boldness in that. And so I think you need to be bold if you're going to be in a leadership role. Now, bold doesn't mean the other B word, by the way. It does not mean that. So, you know, being in leadership, I think regardless, you know, but most definitely if you're in child welfare, it's more than an 8-hour day. It is most definitely more than an 8-hour day. So the demands are vast, right? And so aside from the huge budget, the number of staff, there's urgency in the work that we do. It is literally a life and death job, right? So, and children can't wait. They just can't wait. So a single day matters. And 6 months is way too long to wait to make change. I was mentioning, right? So at my age, 6 months, who cares? You know, I can't get it maybe as fast from the chair as I could before, but 6 months in the life of a child means so much, right? Developmentally, all of these things. So we're dealing with people's lives. And so the bar is set really, really high from all directions, and rightly so, right? You have to hit certain metrics. And if you don't hit those metrics, you failed. If there's any problem, it's your fault, right? I'm just describing the system. I'm just describing the system that's already set up, and we know that it has been set up, rooted in systemic racism, right? But then let me add my own values to the mix here, right? I believe that we owe it to the children that we serve, to the families that we serve, to the communities that we serve, to ensure that we're our best self, right? That we're providing quality, timely, appropriate services, that there are, good processes in place to help keep children safe and well, right? But don't show your stress. Don't have a bad day. Don't disagree with people. Don't speak your mind. Be nice, be kind, make friends, because if you don't, you're going to be judged too harshly, right? But I really do think it goes back largely to gender, race, and ethnicity. It's a man's world. Hitting your metrics, being driven, all of those things are considered positive if you're a man, not a woman.
And I think in a white supremacist culture as well, I'll offer, and which is largely built on a, Caucasian male view of leadership in the world. And so there's that. And sometimes, we internalize some of that and our own worst enemies in terms of the way we push ourselves or lean into some of those given standards. And I wonder if you can talk to us about, have you ever felt like you held yourself to a different or higher standard? And how did that show up for you? How did your being a woman of color, pushing yourself to a higher standard because of those things, how did that show up?
So yes and no, right? In terms of holding myself to a higher standard, geez, I don't know. So for the last 34 years, I've worked serving primarily people in communities of color. I'm serving my people, right? The BIPOC people. So my heart has always been where my work is at. I suppose, my work has really mattered to me in a real significant way. And I've always tried to do my best. And I want those that work alongside me to also do their best. So, I do think that I've pushed myself and others to that higher standard. I can think of a time during which staff were having a really, really difficult time finding a home for a teenage African-American girl. And so I went to some of the employees of African ancestry descent, and I said, please connect me to the leaders in your community. Let me go to them personally and ask for help. Okay, they said. So one Friday afternoon, actually it was Friday around 6:00 p.m. They made time and I went and I met with them. And, they questioned my intent behind the ask and why would you do this? Well, it mattered to me that we find a home for her. So we ended up setting a meeting and I left the invitation list to them. You invite who you think from your community can best help serve. So this child had family. This child actually had a grandmother who had raised her. And grandmother was invited to the meeting. And when I walked into the conference room, she was already sitting there. And I went to go sit next to her and I introduced myself to her. And so we were sitting, together. And I had my hands on the conference table and on the table, and she too had her hands on the conference table. And slowly, one by one, the conference room started filling up with people. And the grandmother reached over and she held my hand and she said, I've lived in this community mostly all my life, and I have never seen so many Black leaders in one room, right? I slept soundly that night. Right? So I want to do that for every family, to feel valued, to feel supported, right? Not shamed, not blamed. So yeah, have added additional pressure to myself and to others.
Yeah, and that brings us back to, I think, what we saw in the beginning of the leadership style. I mean, that's not typically something a director would do, and I think it is maybe a combination of your kind of mama protective instincts, like this baby needs some help, and realizing that, you know, coming from a community of color, that the community needed to be asked to support, to make this happen, that it wasn't something you were going to be able to do alone. And those are really, you know, I think characteristics in transformational leadership, and that adaptive kind of leadership in that moment. And so just illustrating some of the strengths you bring as a woman of color. And that's very different. I think you going to grandma would have been received very differently if you were of another race or even another gender. Like you had something to lean into in that moment that gave you some afforded trust where maybe it wasn't yet earned. Not that other leaders couldn't do it, but it's a place in which it was an advantage, right? I think as an advantage in that additional pressure for you. So might you be able to also give us another example of where you felt most supported as a leader of color? Where did your support come from? Where did you feel like you had folks on whom to rely?
So I feel amazing love and support currently at Koreatown Youth and Community Center, KYCC. I can think of several times when I've had smaller private support and larger public support. There's one time that's really sticks out to me because it wasn't too long ago, which I was so deeply touched and flooded with emotions. Because as I mentioned earlier, you know, I spent a good 2.5 years of my time building community, mending bridges, and getting help in building these bridges in the communities that we had impacted most. And like I mentioned, you know, many have told me that they had never seen or heard of any other leader doing what I was doing. I felt that my responsibility. I also felt it my responsibility that it was not enough that I was trying to do right and good by the children that we were currently serving. I thought it was just as important, or maybe even more important to some degree, that I was doing what I could to prevent other children from ever being maltreated. I spent a lot of time doing that. And so, you know, with the community, I believe what was created was mutual respect and understanding, and there was a collaborative partnership. You know, we wanted the same thing: safety and healthy children cared for in their community. So, you know, my departure was unplanned. And in May of 2020, a prominent leader reached out to me and let me have it. Now, do you all remember what happened in May of 2020? Black Lives Matter. And he let me have it, and I felt horrible. And, you know, he told me that the community trusted me. And they trusted me to help change things for the better. And he said, "Why didn't you come to us? We would have supported you." It's like, oh, my heart. Right? Oh my gosh. Like that just really hurt. So, you know, all of the negative experiences that I've lived through and dealt with, because I'm a female BIPOC leader, well, that one moment almost made it worth it. I was valued.
And I think that gives lesson to all of us too. The time building those relationships, time and community is incredibly important. And when we are stuck or when we're, dealing with pushback to change, that community relationships and allyship can be incredibly important support. And so thank you for that. So I want to kind of switch gears here as we're coming to the end of our time in 10 minutes or so here. I'm wondering, what advice do you have for emerging leaders who are women or people of color or women of color? Any advice around kind of managing this pushback to change, or advice for leaders who are in shoes you've walked in?
So women, BIPOC women, right? Our histories are rich. I'd say use that as your foundation to move forward. I'd say regardless of your age, find a mentor. So my mentor was Jean Gildenberger, and she's Caucasian. She didn't look like me. So the person doesn't need to look like you, right? Jean accepted me for me, right? She challenged me and she gave me opportunities and she guided me, but she didn't tell me what to do or how to be. Not always. I mean, she was my supervisor, right? So sometimes she did need to tell me what to do, right? But I think that's really important. I think mentorship is really important for women.
That's a great one. Is there anything?
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up question? I'm so eager to hear about, I mean, there was that moment, I just so appreciate that story, Francesca, about, kind of this would have, could have, or somebody saying to you, like, we wanted to be there for you, but we didn't know. And I wonder, I mean, can you think through, sort of with us, like, what could people have done? What could somebody have done? If you think like, I'm getting pushback here, I'm calling on you to support me in like, what kind of a way? I mean, how could that have looked truly, do you think?
They have a strong voice, they have a strong presence. I don't know, but I don't know that it mattered. And I don't know that it would have made a difference. And I don't know that that would have mattered. The relationship was built. And so my hope today is that whatever it is that I was able to start didn't end because I left, that they use that as an opportunity to see change is possible. You got to work at that. And so you move that forward, right? So I don't need to be there for that work to continue. I just set the example.
I'm going to add to that a little bit from past other leaders' experience too, is that when you're leading change and there are people who experience a loss as a result of that, and there might be some pushback to change, there are a very small number of people who can, in credible ways, offer a counter narrative or support, and who are willing to do that. And so even if people on your own team believe in the change, there's too much at risk for them to say it, and they're sometimes not a credible source because maybe you force them to say that, right? And so my experience is that when things get tough, sometimes leaders get what I've referred to as kind of the cooties, like nobody wants to be by you. Nobody wants to stand by you because then I might get in trouble too, or I might be associated, or something might happen to me. And so having an external third party who doesn't have vested interest necessarily, or isn't part of this epicenter of the change process, can offer, I think, a safer counter narrative, a credible messenger from community. And I think it's a really important thing to think about as you're leading change efforts. So if this starts to get sticky, who can stand up, who can write the letter to the editor, who can call the county board of supervisors and tell them why this is important or why they're aligned with the change. And it can't be you. And so you need people who can do that. So I think that's a really important thing to do as well. I'm wondering if you have anything that white leaders or allies can be doing to better support our colleagues of color, especially our BIPOC women leaders, like, you know, what can we do to ensure that some of the pushback you get is that we lighten that burden or help in whatever ways you can think of? How can we be most helpful?
So I appreciate that question. So a national CQI consultant once said to me that systems do what systems are set up to do. So, you know, kind of think about that for a while. Systems do what they're set up to do. So I think these are more questions. What is your system like? I'd say examine it, explore it, reflect it, be intentional, take a deep look at your policies and procedures. Remember, this was rooted on systemic racism, right? Like, what can you do to ensure that you're inclusive, that you're anti-racist, that your systems, your people are trauma informed? Like, those are real action steps, right? Do you invite the right people to the table? Are you listening to them, or is it a show, right? I'd also say be careful to assume that because you've taken an implicit bias class, you're good to go. I am a woman of color. I need to continue to learn and grow around that area.
Okay, so I'll bring that into one of my last questions here, which is, I'd like you to send us home with a charge. I want you to give people homework. Is there something that we can all try to do better today to create environments where BIPOC women leaders are able to better thrive? So what is the thing that we can put into practice to help create the right conditions for BIPOC women leadership thriving?
So in the next 40 years, I believe it's projected that the majority of the workforce will be made up of women of color. A Caucasian male leader gave me an opportunity many years ago to represent Los Angeles County at the state level to develop ways to use federal funding, emergency assistance. I was inexperienced. I didn't think I was ready. Not only was I inexperienced, I was like shaking in my high heels, right? I'm a woman, I was young, I'm a woman of color filled with a room with absolutely nobody that looks like me. Incredibly intimidating, right? And after I shook it off, I was myself and I asked questions and I shared my ideas, and all to say this is that, you know, you all need to create on-the-job opportunities for people to take on new task roles, projects, right? Develop a mentoring program. It can be 15 minutes. It can be 30 minutes. It can be informal. It can be formal. Give that time and space. And then encourage people to take 30 minutes out of their day to read an article that's going to help them develop, right? So there's just these tiny things that you can do to support people be their best selves.
Right. So,
and they will then show up for you in these incredible ways.
Right. So make space, provide opportunities, and provide the encouragement. And I think, you know, if I can just build and just add a tiny add is, and keep in mind all of the obstacles and challenges that they're facing that make it even more challenging, and all of the strengths and resilience that they bring that make it more rich, right? So providing that kind of opportunity and space and encouragement everywhere we can to help develop and grow more women leaders and women leaders of color. So we're just down to our last couple of minutes, and I'm wondering, is there anything that I didn't ask you, that we didn't talk about, that you just want to make sure you leave us with? Did we miss anything?
My goodness, no. Thank you. Thought-provoking for myself as well. I don't think I've ever had a platform to share what it's been like for me. So I really appreciate the space, and I appreciate everyone that has been here and has listened with an open heart. I hope it's added some value and some insight to your work and your life. Thank you.
I'm sure it has, and it's been just a real pleasure to hang out with you for a little bit, Francesca, and thank you for your vulnerability and your openness and sharing a little bit of your story with us. And thank you to all of you who came and joined us today for this, and who are going to go home and do your homework and create space and make space and encourage the women of color in your life to take those leadership roles. We're so grateful to you, Francesca, to our friends and colleagues on the call. And just a final closing reminder to check out the resources on the website. And thanks so much for being with us today. Yeah. Thank you.